Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Former First Lady Michelle Obama and former presidential candidate Senator Bernie Sanders headlined the opening night of a virtual Democratic National Convention Monday. Throughout the evening, President Trump was denounced by both Democrats and some former Republican officials, including former Ohio Governor John Kasich. Michelle Obama urged the nation to vote for Joe Biden.
So if you take one thing from my words tonight, it is this. If you think things cannot possibly get worse, trust me, they can and they will if we don't make a change in this election. If we have any hope of ending this chaos, we have got to vote for Joe Biden like our lives depend on it.
Senator Bernie Sanders, who ran against Biden in the primaries, warned Trump's leading the nation toward authoritarianism.
We're facing the worst public health crisis in 100 years and the worst economic collapse since the Great Depression. We are confronting systemic racism and the enormous threat to our planet of climate change. And in the midst of all of this, we have a president who is not only incapable of addressing these crises, but is leading us down the path of authoritarianism.
The Republican National Convention will take place next week. Trump says he'll give his nomination acceptance speech live from the White House grounds, which some charge is a violation of the Hatch Act. We'll have more on the DNC after headlines. A surge in coronavirus cases at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, one of the largest schools in the country, has forced the university to switch entirely to remote learning after over 170 students tested positive for COVID-19 during the first week of in-person classes. The student newspaper, the Daily Tar Heel, ran an editorial headlined, "UNC has a cluster F on its hands," but they spelled out the word. At Georgia Tech, dozens of students staged a die-in on the first day of classes to protest the school's coronavirus safety standards. Meanwhile, on Monday, top White House coronavirus advisor Dr. Deborah Birx said she wished the U.S. had instituted a stricter lockdown earlier this year.
I wish that when we went into lockdown, we looked like Italy. But when Italy locked down, I mean, people weren't allowed out of their houses. And they couldn't come out but once every 2 weeks to buy groceries for 1 hour. And they had to have a certificate that said they were allowed. Americans don't react well to that kind of prohibition.
Meanwhile, data shows the number of Black and Latinx participants in coronavirus vaccine trials is very low, even though Black and Latinx communities are disproportionately hit by the virus. Researchers say this disparity could delay the development of a vaccine. In international news, another 684 people have died in Brazil from COVID-19, bringing the death toll to nearly 109,000, the second highest in the world after the United States. On Monday, dozens of indigenous protesters blocked a major highway in the Amazon to push the Brazilian government to do more to protect indigenous communities during the pandemic. South Korea is facing its worst COVID-19 outbreak in 5 months. More than 400 cases have been linked to a church run by a conservative pastor who tested positive just days after he took part in an anti-government protest in Seoul. Meanwhile, a 6.6 magnitude earthquake that hit Masbate province in central Philippines earlier today, killing at least one person, caused significant damage to a coronavirus quarantine center. The Philippines, which has the highest caseload in Southeast Asia with nearly 170,000 cases, is easing a second lockdown on its capital, Manila, starting this week. Postmaster General Louis DeJoy has agreed to testify before Congress next week amidst the uproar over changes at the U.S. Postal Service that Democrats say are designed to interfere with the November election by making it harder to vote by mail. Louis DeJoy is a mega donor for President Trump. House Democrats are planning to return to Capitol Hill on Saturday to vote on legislation blocking the recent changes. Over a dozen states are now expected to sue the Trump administration administration, and California Congressmember Ted Lieu is calling on the FBI to launch an investigation into the slowing down of the mail. In the Netherlands, a UN-backed court is handing down its long-awaited ruling over the 2005 killing of former Lebanese Prime Minister Refuge al-Hariri. 4 men have been on trial for the truck bomb assassination, which had been attributed to Hezbollah, though it has denied involvement.
The trial chamber is of the view that Syria and Hezbollah may have had motives to eliminate Mr. Hariri and some of his political allies. However, there was no evidence that the Hezbollah leadership had any involvement in Mr. Hariri's murder, and there is no direct evidence of Syrian involvement in it.
The verdict was originally scheduled for earlier this month, but was postponed due to the catastrophic explosion at the port of Beirut on August 4th. In Chile, protests continue in solidarity with Celestino Cordova, an indigenous Mapuche spiritual leader who's been on a hunger strike for over 100 days, demanding he be transferred from prison to house arrest due to the coronavirus pandemic. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights recently sent an investigative unit to the region of Araucania to visit Cordova, who's currently hospitalized in critical condition. He's serving an 18-year sentence for his alleged role in the arson death of 2 landowners in 2013, but his defenders say the charges are politically motivated. In Spain, the royal family confirmed Monday former King Juan Carlos has been living in the United Arab Emirates since August 3rd. His whereabouts were unknown to the public since going into exile earlier this month amidst a growing corruption scandal around his involvement with a Saudi rail contract for which he reportedly received $100 million. Juan Carlos abdicated the throne in 2014 amidst another corruption scandal. He is the father of the current King Felipe. Back in the United States, the Trump administration finalized plans Monday to open up the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, one of the world's last pristine wilderness regions, to oil and frack gas drilling. The Arctic Refuge is rich in biodiversity and has been home to indigenous people for thousands of years. The move will allow oil and gas rights to be auctioned off across more than 1.5 million acres of the Arctic Refuge coastal plains. Interior Secretary David Bernhardt is a former oil lobbyist who's been accused of ethics violations and making policy decisions that directly benefited former clients. In California, the thermometer in Death Valley hit 130 degrees Fahrenheit Sunday, which may be the highest temperature ever recorded on Earth. Scientists are working to confirm the reading, but say the increase in record-breaking temperatures around the world is due to global heating. This comes as California is battling 30 wildfires amidst a record-breaking heat wave. Scientists have found Greenland's ice sheet has shrunk past the point of return, even if global efforts are enacted to slow down the climate catastrophe. The melting of Greenland's ice is steadily pushing sea levels higher as records show the Arctic is warming at least twice as fast as the rest of the world. One of the authors of the recent study in the journal Nature Communications, Earth and Environment said, quote, "Greenland is going to be the canary in the coal mine, and the canary is already pretty much dead at this point." The former chief of staff at the Department of Homeland Security under President Trump has publicly endorsed Joe Biden for president. In a video for Republican voters against Trump, Miles Taylor said Trump wanted to exploit DHS to fuel his own agenda.
Things he wanted to do not only were impossible, but in many cases illegal. He didn't want us to tell him it was illegal anymore because he knew that there were, and these were his words, he knew that he had magical authorities. He was one of the most unfocused and undisciplined senior executives I've ever encountered.
A warning to our audience. The following story contains graphic footage of police violence. In Minnesota, newly released video sheds light on the events leading up to George Floyd's killing by Minneapolis police officer on May 25th. The body camera footage shows then-Officer Tutau confronting a crowd of bystanders that grew increasingly vocal and angry as they watched Officer Derek Chauvin pressing his knee into Floyd's neck for over 9 minutes. Officer Tao ignored the protests of onlookers and repeatedly forced them back onto the sidewalk.
Back off! He's not responsive. Get off the street before you're responsive. Okay, you wouldn't know. Get off the street. He's not responsive right now. He's not responsive right now, bro.
Does he have a pulse?
No, bro, look at him. He's not responsive right now, bro.
Tutau and 2 other officers faced charges of aiding and abetting second-degree murder carried out by Officer Derek Chauvin. In Louisiana, a parole board has set an October hearing for Fair Wayne Bryant, a 62-year-old black man who was sentenced to life in prison for the 1997 burglary of hedge clippers. Earlier this month, 5 white members of Louisiana's Supreme Court upheld the sentence, saying it was permitted by Louisiana habitual offender law. In a scathing dissent, the court's only black member, Chief Justice Burnett Johnson, blasted mandatory minimum sentences under the law as a modern manifestation of segregationist legislation passed after the Civil War. In North Carolina, the state Supreme Court has reinstated a life sentence for Marcus Robinson, a 47-year-old black man who'd been sentenced to death for a 1994 murder. Robinson successfully employed North Carolina's Racial Justice Act to show race was a significant factor in his death sentence. And in Texas, the Austin City Council's redirecting $250,000 from its police department to support a program offering logistical services for abortion access. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York with my co-host Juan Gonzalez, joining us from his home in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.